Everybody ready to go? What a distinguished lineup here. In January of 2019, the city of Indianapolis launched its version of a national effort. We called it the Crime Gun Intelligence Center. It helped to provide local, state, and federal law enforcement a more effective way to coordinate intelligence to combat illegal firearms. In just 1 year, CJIC had removed hundreds of crime guns and hundreds of repeat shooters, trigger pullers, from our streets. So last year, this effort was expanded, becoming the Indiana Crime Guns Task Force. And once again, in just 1 year's time, the results have been impressive. Over 350 arrests and the confiscation of nearly 400 illegal firearms. That expanded partnership also coincided with a 20% decline in the number of murders in Indianapolis compared to this time last year. 20% decline year over year. So today I'm proudly joined by local, state, federal partners who make up the ICGTF. They will provide takeaways from the first year of this initiative with an eye toward looking ahead, where this effort is going in the future. They do so as partnerships gather just down the hall here in Indianapolis for an important conference. Thanks to our leadership, Indiana's leadership on this model, groups now from all over the country are coming here to Indianapolis to learn more. Even before the pandemic, it was clear that coordinated police efforts were necessary to reduce gun violence. Today, as violence in our city falls, we must work even harder to ensure that guns aren't falling into the wrong hands. That's when people get in trouble. When people who have no business carrying a firearm possess a firearm. So to tell us more about this partnership, I want to welcome my dear friend from the mayor of the city of Fishers, Scott Fabus. Scott. Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Hogsett. I appreciate the opportunity to come down here today and talk about this unique collaboration. And it truly is collaborative because we know it's common sense to understand that crime doesn't respect arbitrary political boundaries. And so we must break down those boundaries and work together collectively. And it was almost about a year and a half ago when my police chief, Chief Ed Gephardt, and myself had the opportunity to meet with Assistant Chief Chris Bailey to talk about this Crime Gun Intelligence Center. We had heard a lot about what Indianapolis was doing, and let me be clear that IMPD led the way in bringing this innovation to Indiana. What we were fortunate enough to do is come down and meet with Chief Bailey and find a collaborative spirit in IMPD to allow for us to say, hey, this could be bigger, this could be broader. Let's talk about our donut counties, let's talk about the suburban communities where we know crime is and will continue to grow, and let's work together collectively. And so we came up with a concept, and we pitched that concept to Superintendent Doug Carter, State Police Superintendent, and he believed in it, and he really helped guide and shepherd us through the state legislative process. And we were fortunate enough to sell this idea to our state legislators that if we work collectively together, we can achieve an outcome that is far better than the individual agency can. And Representative Greg Sturwall was a true warrior in getting this legislation passed and allowing us to fund appropriately what we needed to get done. And here we are a year later, by taking some of the most violent criminals off our streets without overburdening our neighborhoods with law enforcement, using science and data and technology to apply good police tactics to accomplish a terrific outcome for not just Indianapolis, The arrests that you'll hear about are from Fishers, they're from Plainfield, they're from Greenwood, they're from Westfield, Zionsville, Carmel. We are all in this fight together, and because of IMPD's leadership and the leadership of all the men and women behind us, we've been able to accomplish something pretty extraordinary in a short period of time. One of the key leaders of that, who I'm going to introduce next, is Assistant Chief Chris Bailey from the onslaught. From when Chief Gebhardt and I went down and spoke with him, he was all about collaboration, and that's a unique attribute in an individual, and we're grateful for it. Chris?
Good morning. I want to start by saying we wouldn't be here today without the cooperation and leadership from the law enforcement leaders in this room and from the mayors that you see here, Mayor Hogsett and Mayor Fadness. And I also want to throw a shout out to Representatives Greg Storwell and John Bartlett, who were sponsors and co-sponsors of this bill, and the bipartisan support that created the Indiana Crime Guns Task Force last year. In these types of multi-jurisdictional endeavors, leadership and support matter, and this endeavor has just that. For over a year, this task force has been sending a clear message to criminals. You cannot hide across these invisible boundary lines, and what we are doing is working. The numbers speak for themselves. From July 1st, 2021 to now, the Indiana Crime Guns Task Force has proven to be successful in removing illegal firearms out of the hands of criminals and holding accountable those who traffic illegal firearms. Officers have seized 369 firearms and made 397 arrests just in the past year. This group, from its inception in 2019, have taken hundreds of additional guns off our streets. I want to highlight a case, the cooperation and the impact the Indiana Crime Gun Task Force has had in just the past year. Stats alone are important, but what is most important is the impact our efforts have in our neighborhoods and on our neighbors. Just last week, the Indiana Crime Guns Task Force, the IMPD SWAT team, the IMPD Southwest District Violent Crime Teams, Whitestown Police Department, Boone County Sheriff's Office, and Zionsville Police Department worked together on a joint operation. By using various techniques, investigators were able to obtain information on a wanted person traveling back to central Indiana from Chicago after being there less than 24 hours. The suspect was known to police to be a methamphetamine dealer here in central Indiana. Investigators also knew that this suspect had 3 warrants out of Marion County for possession of a firearm by a serious violent felon and methamphetamine. Because of their coordinated efforts and information sharing and partnerships, the IMPD SWAT team took into custody without incident this individual and seized methamphetamine, synthetic marijuana, MDMA pills, heroin, crack cocaine, and took 2 handguns from this prohibited person. We may not know how many lives were potentially saved by getting this dangerous individual off the street, but I will say this, and I've said it before. Every single time we take a gun out of the hands of an individual, a prohibited person, lives are saved. Bottom line, our efforts, the efforts of the detectives that are in the back of the room, are paying off. We are taking illegal guns off the street and getting them out of the hands of criminals because we are laser focused on the small number of people, places, and behaviors contributing to violent crime in central Indiana. A lot of this, as I just said, is because of the women and men who stand up here alongside me, but more importantly, from the detectives, officers, agents, prosecutors, analysts, and the community members who do the hard work, the dangerous work, every single day and put themselves between us and evil and say to the community, not today. We look forward to what the next year brings. And now I'll ask Superintendent Doug Carter to come up here, who has been a great partner for us in this endeavor and many more. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you. Just a few brief comments from me. We might be the face of this, but as Chris said, the people that are doing this work out there every single day are the ones that really matter and have made it successful and will continue to make it successful. I still remember the day that I met with Mayor Fadness and Chief Gebhardt and Deputy Chief Bailey and as we were talking about this concept. it was a perfect time for us as an agency, for a state police agency, because of the laboratory network that we've continued to build and invest about $100 million in over the course of the last few years. So it's certainly my hope, and with ATF, that we can actually grow this web outside of Indianapolis to our other regional laboratories in partnership with the ATF and the Correlation Center, all the detectives that give so much time and staff that give so much time to these kinds of cases. It was a perfect opportunity. It made perfect sense to me. It became very personal to me and to many of you, all of you actually, with what recently occurred in Elwood and Richmond, Indiana. Neither one of those individuals should obviously are prohibited. I'll just leave it at that. Both were prohibited. And what they did and how it rocked the conscience of two local communities should allow all of us to take a step back and say, not today, as Deputy Chief Bailey says, not today. So I'm looking forward to what the future might bring. The partnership to receive the dollars we received from the Indiana General Assembly with Representative Stierwald, specifically as the lead, and several other representatives from around the General Assembly, is something that we've never experienced before. So we have this innate opportunity, and it's a perfect time for me to mention Val Cunningham, and certainly Chris Bailey, who have kind of spearheaded how we're going to use those dollars in the appropriate way, not for what we can, but for what we should use them for. And we will continue to do that over time. So it's a pleasure to be here with you. Daryl McCormick is the new SAC with ATF, and he's a welcome addition to this initiative, and frankly, it wouldn't be successful without the ATF involvement. And we're going to continue to see this over time. And remember, people might be able to hide from intelligence, but they can't hide from science. And that's the most amazing thing about what we're doing here now. They cannot hide from it. And we're coming. We're coming. Daryl?
Thank you. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Daryl McCormick. I'm the new special agent in charge for ATF that covers this area. And it's an honor and privilege to be here today standing with all of our partners. So I want to kind of sum up today with just like what is the heart of the Indiana Crime Guns Task Force. First, I want to tell you that ATF has a kind of long history of close collaboration with our law enforcement partners at the state and local level. But I'll tell you, the Indiana Crime Gun Task Force is much more than just collaboration and cooperation. It's complete integration. Integration of our information, our capabilities, and our talents. The Indiana Crime Gun Task Force uses evidence-based, intelligence-led techniques to identify and apprehend those who drive violent gun crime in our communities. This includes the use of the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, known as NIBIN, which tells us that shootings are connected to each other. Firearms tracing, that helps us identify the source of crime guns to criminals. And the sharing of investigative information to focus on that small number of criminals who really do a disproportionate amount of gun crime. But I'll tell you, as said before, the heart of this task force is the people. It's the talented and dedicated detectives, officers, patrolmen, special agents, and intelligence analysts who are committed to bringing justice for the victims of gun crime and also to disrupt the cycle of violence. So I'll close in saying that ATF is absolutely committed to the relentless pursuit that this task force has to protect the public and keep the streets safe for everyone. Thank you.
Open it up for questions.
How permanent was very mentioned strategy for the task force of tracking down for the
The question was, how does the permitless carry impact the work that our officers and detectives do? I think it's still to be seen what the exact impact will be. I know there are examples. I read about 2 examples in the first weekend where the law was effective, where our officers basically had to let 7 different guns walk away from 2 different traffic stops, and so we'll never know what those guns may or may not have been connected to. The previous day or a couple days before that, they would have been prohibited from carrying guns in the state of Indiana. So I think it's something we'll have to watch, and we'll continue to talk to our investigators who deal with this every single day, and maybe have a better idea, once we're further into this law. But right now, I just can't give you a definitive answer on how it's going to impact anything.
Is there concern, though, that it's going to impact sort of the work that you already put together this past year?
Yeah, I think that, I know I've been clear about it, and Chief Taylor's been clear about it, and certainly Superintendent Carter, who we stand behind 100%, that obviously the investigative techniques and tactics that our investigators have been hindered by this. I mean, part of getting a hold of a gun is to legally possess gun, is to see where that gun came from. We see constant stolen guns in our community, but we also miss opportunities to link these guns through science, as the superintendent said, to non-fatal shootings and homicide investigations that families are waiting for justice on. And, I think they'll tell you anecdotally that it's a hindrance, but like all good investigators and agents, they will find a way to operate within the law and still accomplish their mission.
What's the average number of crimes that a gun is involved with when you ultimately confiscate it? Is that something you can speak to?
I can't say that every single gun that we have is connected in some way. I mean, that's the guns and the investigations that this task force engages in usually are connected to the gun has been used at least twice in some sort of gun incident, whether it's a shots fired, a non-fatal shooting, a homicide, or otherwise. We've had guns that have been linked to 20 plus incidents around the city, maybe more. The guns tend to be traded or handed off to different places across the city and different individuals to use. But there's no average or standard for each gun. That's why we use science and we use intelligence and we use this specific weapon to lead our investigators. These aren't based on people all the time. It starts off as science and then leads to people who are responsible for violent crime.
Obviously, you never know how many crimes are actually prevented. It's hard to measure something that didn't happen. So how do you measure success?
We measure success by impact, right? I mean, I think that the mayor mentioned some of that. I mean, we're not running a victory lap that homicides are down. We still have a significant issue in our city, and we're working to reduce those numbers from a variety of standpoints, and that law enforcement, social, and otherwise, with the amount of investments that the city is making across a wide spectrum of techniques to reduce violent crime. But when we were able to impact some groups, the crime contributing groups, and when we see them and pull them out of neighborhoods, that impacts a neighborhood. Like you said, it's hard to prove a negative, but I stand committed to what I said earlier, is that every time we take a gun out of the hands of someone who's prohibited from using it, who has shown in the past that they're not afraid to use a firearm against another human being, we potentially save a life, including the person that was possessing the illegally possessed firearm. So we're just going to keep doing our work. The community is important in any endeavor if we're going to reduce violent crime in the long term, and they've been stepping up and providing information and being patient with their law enforcement professionals. As we said to them, this is going to take a little bit to turn around, and we're starting to see the fruits of our labors and many others in the community, and we just got to keep at it and keep focused on those small number of people responsible.
Hey, Chris, can I have that for just a
Yes.
second, too? I love the question, and we were asked that question specifically during the legislative process to get these dollars to kick this off. And the analytical metric is so common today, and if you don't meet the metric, you weren't successful. And there's a couple of analogies that I'd like to use for that. One is the DARE program. Nationally, you'd find the DARE program probably is not ultimately very successful, some would say. But I say you ask anybody that had the DARE program who their DARE instructor was, they'll be able to give you the name. And all you have to do is walk in and see what these folks are doing every single day. And if they take that one gun off, one gun, was the $5 million, $10 million worth it? The answer, of course, is yes. So we're not going to get to the point where we're going to say, if we get to A, you're successful. What we're going to say is every single day we're going to try to get to A, and eventually we will.
Yeah, let me just add one last thing. I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but it's important to underscore that here, I can't speak for any of the other communities, but here in the city of Indianapolis, in 2022 to date, we're not only down 20% in murders, we are down 18% in overall homicides. We're down 16.6% over and against last year in aggravated assaults. The number of carjackings are down. The number of non-fatal shootings are down 10%. So you're absolutely right, Jesse. It's very difficult to prove a negative, but what statistics we do have are fairly discernible that the investments that we are making, not only just in the Indiana Gun Crimes Task Force, but just across the board, at least here in the city of Indianapolis, it's making a real difference. Now, I want to be careful. As soon as I say that, we have to keep our eye on the ball. But any homicide is unacceptable, but the numbers are moving in the right direction.
I'm curious if anyone happens to have, I know you mentioned some of the crime numbers. I'm curious if anyone has the numbers of how many guns were seized from 2019 to 2020. And just like for comparison for the number of arrests, if you guys don't know that off the top of your head.
No, the PIOs can get it from the task force numbers from CJ from 2019. All that information is available, readily available. We'll make sure you have it. It's hundreds, probably approaching 1,000 guns taken by this task force since 2019.
What are the biggest obstacles, barriers that this task force removes, or how does it speed up the process of sharing information about crimes?
First, to your question, 310 illegal firearms off the streets of Fishers. 203 go back to violent crime in Indianapolis. So as the metro city goes, the suburbs go as well, which is why you're seeing the suburb chiefs up here with me. But the information now is seamless. So whether it be through intel and analytics, that information gets back to our agencies up in the suburbs. It allows us to react and help and be teammates, and to get other resources from our department to fight the greater good of the metro and our own cities in particular. Plus, we have detectives embedded with the Crime Gun Task Force, and they come back and communicate with our officers to keep that information flowing on the people we're looking for as well. So you can't hide in the suburbs anymore. So we're gonna help all we can from that angle.
Anything else, guys?
There were a couple of guns confiscated at the shooting of the funeral director about 10 days ago now. Do we know yet if those guns were involved in any other crimes?
I don't have that information at this point. We can follow up with it, but right now I don't know.
That's good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You want to go?
Thank you.